Welcome back, everybody. Just taking a few of the wrinkles out of X231's dash. I'll flip that. That's a little better. When you're dealing with metal this thick, you don't need a body hammer. A good old heavy ball peen will do. So, one more. Just a little bit left on that corner. Yeah, good. I like it. Also, while I was at it, I put 2 new grease zerk fittings into the dash for that upper steering shaft. So we're ready to go there. I also sandblasted the parts and pieces that will go back in there, as well as the front fuel tank support bracket. I straightened the minor bends, so that's all good and flat and clean, ready to bolt on. And where this lever pins onto the bottom of the throttle rod. Remember, we were missing the roll pin and this was all loose. And one of the prior episodes I said I thought there were some casting numbers in there, but I couldn't make them out. After I sandblasted it, I found a very clear 10X, and then the other 4 digits get a little hard to read. I think it's a 5432, but I'm mostly guessing, but that's definitely a 10X lever. Right where I thought there used to be a number, it's faint, but it's there. And where I thought the hole for that roll pin was all hogged out, turns out it was a lot larger of a hole than I thought, and it was just mostly full of debris. Once I got it cleaned out, yeah, look right through. It's a really nice, clean, round hole. It's a little bit chewed towards the top, but I think an old roll pin cracked, and it just kind of wore there. So I tried a new 3/16 roll pin, and it drives in nice and tight. So bonus, we don't have to close that back up and drill it back out. We can leave the bottom end alone. I just have to decide what I'm going to do with all the ugly up here. And after looking at the archive photos, this lever did not start out at 90 degrees. It was more like a 45. But we'll address that towards the end of the episode. I'm going to think a little bit more on what I want to do there. So as promised last time, we'll get back into reconditioning these steering shafts. We'll get through it here. So yeah, these are the easy production, typical U-joints. First thing I'm going to do is pop this yoke off and this yoke off. We can clean these pieces, get at least one joint replaced, and then start looking at the wear that's on that longer shaft. So let's get these apart. This shaft was too long to fit in the press, and I doubt that yoke's ever been off. When all of this stuff is clean, you should be able to just throw them on there by hand. We have to get both yokes off if we're going to recondition the shaft and the bracket that's also on it. All right, there's that one. All right, so here's that support bracket, and right through here is where it used to ride, and there's a lot of wear right there. We'll get that off for now. Start working on this end. Up on this end, I want to get the U-joint at least out of this yoke before we take this yoke off of the shaft. So there are 2 clips, one on the inside of each cap. I'll show this process because we didn't have this on camera from the last one. We took the last one apart years ago. There. And it rolls across the floor. There's one clip. The other one's over here. I'll have to flip it around to get at the end of that one. There, we cut this one before it went flying. There. All right, I've got everything clean except for the yoke that's on this far end, and I think this is as far as I'll go with it because it really should be replaced. We can dive into that more toward the end of the episode. I found something interesting about the longer steering shaft. I think this probably started life as a ZB tractor steering shaft, which would have put it to about where my hand is right here. It would have been about that long, and I think they just chopped it because this is still a nice finished end, turned and chamfered, all clean. This end is just square and the hacksaw marks are still visible. That's one thing about these prototypes. They just modified things only as far as they needed to make them work. So the next thing I have to address is the wear on this long shaft between these two marks here and here. You can kind of see it right now. That's where this support bracket with bushing went around the shaft, and there's a threaded hole right here in the top where it used to have a grease fitting, but I don't think one has been there for a long time. And so much wear on this bushing too, it's sharp. So that's something else we're going to have to address. The amount of wear on the shaft becomes evident when I put this machinist's rule alongside of it. Quite a lot of material missing. But when I sight down the shaft, minus the GoPro fishbowl effect that's making it look like it's doing that right now, when I sight down the shaft, it looks like it's nice and straight. I haven't spun it in the lathe yet, but it's a 1-inch diameter shaft, so that's a pretty easy target to hit. Yeah, when I put the shaft down here, I can see in the viewer, the lens makes it look like it's bowed, but right there in the middle, you can see what I'm seeing. If I can weld this up without warping it, I should be able to turn it right back down to original diameters. So let's see if we can save it. What I'll do is lay a bead right down the top, and then I will rotate the shaft 180, and I'll put another bead right down the other side of it, and I'll just keep working back and forth like that and give it opportunity to cool in between. That usually keeps the warp out of it. You kind of disperse the heat evenly, and you don't have weld cooling too much on one side and wanting to pull the shaft. All right, when you're building up, it doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to be plenty. Got it fixed into the South Bend 11-inch steady rest stabilizing for us. So we'll begin taking this down, and this is always kind of fun when you start out. It's all bumpy and it's an interrupted cut, but then as you get closer and closer to shaft diameter, it starts smoothing out and becoming uniform. I just kind of enjoy that. We're starting to smooth out a lot better now. And I think this might be the final pass. I think that turned out well, and the shaft stayed nice and straight. We didn't warp it. So that means we can start putting some U-joints and yokes back together. And yeah, once everything is cleaned up, no pullers necessary. You should be able to just put them all together by hand, just like that. And I'm going to use new roll pins as well. So we can start hammering these. Okay, now that we're fresh off of replacing the world's worst U-joint in the prior episode, we get to replace U-joints like a normal person that doesn't have an X231 to contend with. So these are just typical needle bearing style. I've thrown the grease fitting in the center so far. It looks like it should clear everything, but if it doesn't, we'll just take it back out until we get it thrown in. So, okay, try not to get grease all over the nice, clean, shiny pieces. Let's go with this one. It's a little bit dirtier. Okay, get him all looped in there. And it's about just starting one cap at a time. Get him knocked in far enough to be started. And pull it out just a little ways so that we can start it into the needles of the other cap. Very important to have the cross pegs in both needles at the same time, otherwise you can hook one with the end of the peg, turn it sideways. Then you have a bad day and you have to take it back apart, sort it all out. These universal joint caps are the internal clip style. So there's a little circ clip and one goes just inside of the yoke right here and another one goes right there on each side. Most U-joints are an external clip style where the cap would be recessed into the opening here and then the clip would go out here. But this is usually what you see most in tractor steering systems. So clips are sticking through, or the grooves for the clips are sticking through the yoke's just fine, so we'll have no problem popping both those clips on just like that. Now, this one's a little bit stiff from hammering it in, so when that happens, you just go and kind of pop the top of each yoke a few times. That's going to center it out, and all of a sudden, look at that, we're a lot better. And we'll just do the same thing to put the other yoke on. clip, and clip. Good, we're done with this one. All right, we just about have the steering shaft finished, really. Our upper shaft that we repaired last time will pin on right here, and I've preloaded the second new universal joint into the yoke that would go on the end of the shaft here. We need to leave this yoke off for now because we have to figure out our brace with bushing so that we can slide it onto the shaft before that yoke goes on and prevents us from doing so. This piece is, the more I look at it, the more confused I get. It's been worn very badly. You could probably cut yourself on the edge of the bushing there. It's so sharp. But the bends are a little bit hard to explain. It goes on this bolt right here, and it sits vertically like that. The grease fitting would have been on the top, and then the steering shaft comes down through that bushing on out to the steering gear that will be going into the bolster. Although we have evidence of two different bends. We've got this one right here that has a very definite crease mark like from a V-block, but then there's also a definite crease mark here on this other one that also bears hammer marks on the front, like someone was trying to flatten it at one time. I still don't know if that happened down on the farm, if that was some, down on the farm alignment methods, or if they found that they had put the bend in the wrong spot at the factory and then just tried to hammer that one flat and then put a secondary one up here. When we align that with the bell housing, the angle looks right. If we just replicated this upper bend. So they may have put the bend in the wrong place originally. I don't know. At any rate, this piece I think is going to be a write-off. It would take more to save it than it would to make a new one. And there's really no historical significance to this, no X numbers. It's ran loose up here at the top for so long. I think they oblonged that hole for adjustability. I think that was a purposeful thing. That's not really wear, but I'm just going to copy this one, make all new, and we'll throw this in with the other parts and pieces that we took off of X231. And it's a pretty simple bushing. We're sized to 1 inch on the inside to fit the shaft. And then the outside here is 1.5 inches. Then it steps down to 1 3/8 inches. We're 1.25 inches overall length, and we're just shy of 3/4 back here before we have to turn down for the step, 0.700. Interesting tidbit, I realized this bushing is the same as this one inside the dash. They're the same piece. So let's get busy on making a new bushing, and then we'll finish out the rest of the bracket from there. I've got this piece of round tube. It's already 1.5 inches on the outside and 1 inch on the inside. So that gets us really close to where we need to be. Now we've got the collar viced in under the drill press, and for once it's nice to not be in front of a lathe. This steering work has really had us standing in front of lathes quite a lot. I'm drilling the hole for the grease fitting. Cutting the threads now. So the bushing portion is finished. I just want to test the fit of the Zerk fitting to make sure it doesn't stick down far enough to contact the shaft, and we're good. So I'll leave that fitting out for now, And that's all we need to do there. So looking at the bracket then, what I did was make a paper template, over here, of the shape of the bracket. And we can use this paper template to kind of conform to the bends and whatnot. I then transferred that shape onto the appropriate thickness steel sheet. This is a 0.135 thick, matches the thickness of the original bracket. So now that we have our outline, we'll get that cut out. So here's our bracket blank, and I worked hard to keep all of the irregularities around the perimeter that the original one has. We just followed the template, so the bushing will drop in just like so. So we're keeping right in line with the design of the original one. Now for the bend. I'm going to abandon this one for now that looks like it was hammered flat and just copy the, get this out of the way, sorry. Just copy this upper one here. So one thing about that bushing, it makes it easy to overlay the old blank onto the new one, and then we just transfer where that bend line happens to be. That's where we need to locate it. So I'll throw the bracket into the V blocks that I made for forming X231's 2-3 shift fork all the way back in episode number 46. That was January of 2023. And these tools are coming in handy once again. So I'm just aligning our line with the point of the V, and okay, I'm liking it right there. Okay, looks good. So we'll just form it, and I'll use as much as I can of the old one as a guide. It's a little bit obscured because we have that other one in there, but the back side gives me a little bit better idea. And you usually have to overextend the bend because when you take the pressure off, it will spring back somewhat. But right there, we're getting close, but we need a little bit more. Okay. Let's take the pressure off and see how far it springs back. Oh, not much. All right. Okay. Nice clean looking bend. Okay. Throw the bushing in real quick. Compare side by side, and we're close. Take the bushing out, overlay off the back, and yes, except for over here we get a little bit of wide, so that tells me this one is canted a little bit more to the side than our replacement blank, but this does have the remnants of a secondary bend too that's going to skew that top a little bit. However, I think we're going to leave it like this for now, and we're not going to weld the bushing in either because we still don't know for sure exactly how this needs to be positioned on the bell housing. Gauging it against the bell housing, it does look like the top could stand to pivot outward just a little bit more than what it is, but we won't know the final position of this until we have the dash on with that long steering shaft that comes down the side, and maybe even have the steering gear in the front bolster. These really worn splines down here is where that long steering shaft attaches, and we won't be able to put the long shaft together or put it in the dash until we have some resolution on this end yoke that I mentioned earlier we are replacing, or I'm hoping to replace, because there's the corresponding splines in that end yoke, and Yeah, no pin down here. This is just a slip fit, and it's pretty typical to see everything completely wallowed. These splines are almost stripped totally out of the yoke, and they're probably 50% maybe on the steering gear shaft. So that's a major hurdle. This piece I ordered from Welter's Farm Supply 2 days ago. I'm hoping it shows up tomorrow, and I'm hoping it's identical in dimension to this old yoke. We will find out. So until we can get some resolution down here on the end of this, we've put everything together about as far as we can go. But there is one more thing we could probably do yet today. Let's do a quick dry run assembly of the upper steering shaft in the dash. It'll make sense in just a minute. Throw that in like that. And I think you all can see. Now I know you all can see. This collar goes on the top. That's what holds the steering shaft up. Keeps it in location. Just cinch that for now. Good spin. All right. And the throttle shaft that we have to address all the boogering of the ugly weld. We can place that in there, and we'll just place it in for mock-up. And one final piece for perspective. All right, steering wheel. Now we need to get at about this angle here. All right. Now reference this to the archive photo of X231. I was studying this the other night, and I noticed this throttle shaft looks like originally extended up at approximately a 45-degree angle, which would have put the knob very close to the vicinity of the steering wheel. I know it's very hard to see, and the detail is not great up there, but you can clearly see that masked off round knob up pretty close to the steering wheel. Now, the whole time we've had X231, it's had the 90-degree bend on this throttle lever. And arguably, with the friction cone that's in here, a 90-degree bend on that lever will be a lot more easy to operate than something that's up at like a 45. You have much better mechanical advantage on that friction cone. That said, there's no telling whether or not the factory were the ones that took it from the 45 elevated position and bent it down to the 90, possibly because that made it work a lot better. I doubt they would have bent it that cleanly back on the farm, but I'm almost certain that ugly weld is from back on the farm. Like they did break this off at one point in time, and I am going to repair that weld. So also keep in mind, if we repair this lever, do we keep it at the 90 or do we put it back to the 45? I'm leaning toward the 45 because I was going to say, keep in mind, the seat cushion is probably going to be about where my hand is on X231. So you would be sitting with the steering wheel within pretty decent reach right out ahead of you. Having the throttle about a foot further down would be kind of an uncomfortable reach, having to get way down to it. It would be more convenient to have it up there in that territory, but a case could be made 3 different ways on this thing. And I'll try to get through this in one take. I don't know if you've been able to tell in my voice, but springtime allergies have really kicked up this last day and a half. So the greening has begun. That just means the next couple weeks are going to be a bit uncomfortable. So 3 different arguments could be made. We're going to repair this lever. The first argument, which is valid, is to leave it exactly as it is, 90-degree bend, ugly weld and all, because we don't know who did what when, and this is how we found it. It's technically original, all right? Yeah, solid case can be made for that. Argument number 2, clean up the weld, leave it at the 90, because there's no telling whether or not it wasn't the factory that put that down at a 90 to make it work a little bit better, and it was just another modification like many others that we've been able to see that happened to X231 before it left their stewardship. Or argument number 3, which again is just as valid as the first 2, we're going to clean that weld anyway, and we have that archive photo as our ideal, kind of our roadmap. Return it up to the 45 that is in that photo, original configuration. And that's what makes this tractor so frustrating yet so interesting at the same time, or this project, I should say. And it further illustrates the point I've made before, where I say you could give this tractor to 10 different people, give them all the same shop and the same tools, and you would still get 10 different finished results on a restoration, because there are so many decisions like that that could be made. And basically any one of those options or all of those options are valid. So it's really up to the end restorer. I'm leaning towards returning it back to the 45, cleaning up the weld, making it look just like the picture. But post up below, what would you do? This is just part of the fun conversation that can pop up from a project like this. Very unique. So that's all we can do today. I'm hoping that yoke shows up tomorrow. If it does, we can slam the rest of that steering shaft together and then start assembling the dash after we fix that throttle lever, and hopefully have those pieces bolted on for good. So I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm about to sneeze, so I better get going. Thank you all, and I hope to see you back on the next one.